In this session, we move into Chapter 7 and Part 3, by the way, of Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart by Nicholas Carr. Part 3 is titled, Everything is Mediated. And on the title page for Part 3, Carr includes this quote from René Girard. The affair appears more serious. All guideposts are gone, in time as well as in space. There is no longer either difference or deferral, no more horizon, no more fixed point anywhere to provide sense or direction. Chapter 7, The Dislocated Eye. Contagion. The poppies returned on schedule to the slopes of Walker Canyon in early 2020, though a dry winter kept their numbers down. Even if they had bloomed as profusely as they had the year before, few would have been around to bear witness. By the time the first buds opened, a very different sort of superbloom, that of the novel coronavirus, as we called it then, was underway. No one wanted to risk infection by congregating in a field of flowers to take pretty Instagram shots, however many hearts they might rack up. Even the influencers stayed home. Shortly after the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a pandemic on March 10th, Walker Canyon was closed to the public. The poppies bloomed in silence, undisturbed, unphotographed. And I'll just add a personal note here that I remember that time very well because Joanna went into the hospital. That was first of two successive hospitalizations, one in March, one in April. In the March one, I was able to go to her room. It was right before the shutdowns all started. So I was able to go to her room, be with her and everything. I remember Doug Haney, who was then our minister of music at Wilshire, came to visit her. And then, of course, the next month when she went in again, everything was shut down. Nobody was allowed at all. I was not allowed to even enter the hospital. I had to drop her off at the curb, have a nurse take her up to admit her into her room and so forth. I could not see her the whole week. She was in there for, I think, went in on Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and was discharged on Friday or Saturday. I was not able to see her at all, that in April. Anyway, that's how I marked the pandemic. And for her and me, the pandemic wasn't the main priority that year because her health was slipping, and a great concern that year. And we didn't pay as much attention. I mean, obviously, when we went out, we wore masks and all that kind of thing. But it didn't affect us in the way that it affected a lot of people, because I think our focus was so much on her health and getting her stronger and better. She did physical therapy later that year to try to build herself up and she did, to where she could get back on the transplant list, because they took her off for a while because of her condition. So anyway, that's my memory of 2020. My main memory of 2020 is the focus on her health. Continuing. As the world went quiet, social media buzzed more loudly than ever. All the popular platforms announced big gains in traffic. Visits to Facebook jumped by more than a quarter between the end of January and the end of March. YouTube and TikTok saw similar spikes. On Twitch, Amazon's live streaming service, People watched 1.7 billion hours of video in May, nearly double what they had watched 6 months earlier. The boom went beyond the usual posts and pics, podcasts, and vlogs. Cut off from physical spaces, everyone crowded into virtual ones. Schools held remote classes, businesses remote meetings. Museums and galleries hosted virtual exhibits. Yoga studios and gyms offered virtual workouts. Okay, churchgoers congregated on screens. I sure remember that. That did affect us. Who knew? We went to Wilshire for church on one Sunday in March 2020. Who knew that would be the last time she would ever go there again? The rest of the year we were on Zoom at church. I say we were on Zoom. We were on Zoom in Sunday school. We were watching worship with no congregation on YouTube. And it was quite a thing the next year when we resumed services. Of course, that was after she had already been interned on Easter Sunday, but we actually resumed full-time services in June of 2021. And it was really wrenching for me as those first few times going back to church without her. And of course, it still affects me. So, I like to add these little personal comments because these things bring up memories for me, even a book like this. All right, continuing. I'll try to leave my personal comments off the rest of the time, but we'll see. So churchgoers congregated on screens. Friends gathered for Zoom cocktails. By 2022, close to half of American adults under the age of 50 reported being online almost constantly, according to a Pew survey. The same was true of teenagers. With the real world seeming alien and treacherous, it was the virtual one that now felt familiar and safe. The metaphor of contagion has always shaped the way we think and talk about social media. The top platforms have been designed to encourage the rapid transmission of messages from person to person. The most successful posts and memes are the most infectious ones, the ones that go viral. The word influencer shares an etymological root with influenza. Hadn't thought of that before. When years ago Mark Zuckerberg needed a code name for Facebook's automated advertising system, he chose pandemic. But with the arrival of the coronavirus, the contagion metaphor took an unexpected turn. When a real pathogen is on the loose, we discovered, social media turns into an antiviral. It allows people to socialize without physical proximity, to gather together while remaining apart. If there was anything fortunate about COVID's arrival, it was the timing. The disease appeared after social media had already trained us in the art of social distancing. Our phones and laptops proved our most valuable pieces of personal protective equipment. The pandemic and the lockdowns it triggered was less an inflection point than a moment of revelation. It brought into relief how thoroughly we've adapted ourselves to digital media. At the start of the century, we still talked about going online the way we talked about going to the movies or going out to eat. It was an experience outside ordinary experience, a special event bounded in time, and because Wi-Fi networks were scarce, space. You logged on, then you logged off. Now we're never not online. The climate of social media, which the writer Patricia Lockwood memorably describes as at once tropical and snowing, a clammy hothouse through which blows the blizzard of everything, is the general climate. The digital information flow, incessant and efflorescent, almost pornographic in its blurring of the intimate and the public, has invaded our consciousness and even more so subconsciousness. Even when we aren't looking at our phone, recent studies show the device and its apps maintain a grip on our attention. Social media is, to use the psychological jargon, a priming mechanism of unprecedented intensity. It keeps us in a permanent state of anticipation, awaiting the next stimulus, craving the next glance at the screen. However banal the revelations that come through our apps, they're always novel and they're often personal. We know that behind the screen, our social life continues to unfold around the clock, with or without our active participation. People are looking at us and talking to us or about us. We're being sized up, envied, celebrated, shamed, shunned. We exist today in the liminal space between the material and the mediated, present when absent, absent when present. As anyone who has participated in meetings on Zoom or other conferencing platforms knows, it's pretty much impossible to resist the temptation to look at one's own image inside its allotted cell on the screen. In those uncanny moments when the physical self observes the mediated self in real time, we're most aware of the duality of our being today. Such self-viewing is often assumed to be an act of vanity or even narcissism, but really it's the opposite, an act of critical, clinical self-assessment. Wrote the 19th century Scottish poet Robert Burns in To a Louse, "O wad some power the giftie gie us, to see ourselves as others see us." Wasn't there something of that in the old TV show Candid Camera and its theme song? "See ourselves as others see us," I think, was a part of that. Social media is the power that has at last given us that dubious giftie. What we're doing when we gaze upon our Zoom reflection, observing ourselves speak and listen, act and react, is not admiring our reflection, but trying to decipher how our image appears to others. In that gaze, we become both watcher and watched. Places and stages. What happens to us when so much of life is lived through communication systems, when the self, reconfigured as a pattern of information, is constantly being encoded and decoded? Charles Cooley offers some guidance here, too. In his major work, Human Nature and the Social Order, published in 1902, 5 years after the process of social change, the paper that he quoted from earlier in the book, Cooley's paper that Carr quoted from. 5 years after that, the process of social change, where Cooley coined the term social media. In Human Nature and the Social Order, published in 1902, he introduced the idea that would make him famous in sociological and psychological circles, that of the looking-glass self. A person's sense of self, he argued, emerges not from the inside out, as thinkers as diverse as Descartes, Emerson, and Nietzsche had supposed, but from the outside in. As we see our face, figure, and dress in the glass and are interested in them because they are ours, and pleased or otherwise with them according as they do or do not answer to what we should like them to be, so in imagination we perceive in another's mind some thought of our appearance, manners, aims, deeds, character, friends, and so on, and are variously affected by it." End quote. Our self-image, as Cooley saw it, takes shape through a reading of signals, through feedback loops between our own mind and the minds of everyone we interact with. Quote, "That the I of common speech has a meaning which includes some sort of reference to other persons is revealed," he argued, "in the very fact that the word and the ideas it stands for are phenomena of language and the communicative life. We may speak ourselves into being, but an audience is always involved. Without others, neither language nor communication would have any purpose. Our communal sympathetic mind reading," Cooley went on to suggest, "forms the very essence of human relations. The imaginations which people have of one another are the solid facts of society." The solid facts, solid facts, that phrase italicized here. And Carr says, with those italics, he acknowledged a paradox. What's solid in society consists largely of images flickering in the mind. Cooley was not implying that individuals lack inner lives or innate qualities. He was a firm believer in human nature at both the species and the individual levels. His point was that the self cannot exist except in a social context. Without the presence of others, we have no cause to picture ourselves as distinct beings or to speak. The tendency of the self, like every aspect of personality, can't be understood or predicted except in connection with the general life, he wrote. Fundamental to his view is a sense of the self's adaptability and flexibility. We tailor our words and actions, our behavioral self-portrait, to whomever we sense to be observing us at any given moment. Nature may give us an underlying score, but like jazz musicians, we improvise the music together in response to one another's often tacit signals. We always imagine and in imagining share the judgments of the other mind, Cooley wrote. A man will boast to one person of an action, say some sharp transaction in trade, which he would be ashamed to own to another. The content of the self, again, Cooley's wording is prescient, varies indefinitely with particular temperaments and environments. The I is contextual. It changes as situations change. Cooley was not the first to posit a protean self. His elder contemporary William James had made a similar point just a few years earlier in Principles of Psychology, a book Cooley knew well and admired deeply. Quote, properly speaking, a man has as many social selves as there are individuals who recognize him and carry an image of him in their mind. But as the individuals who carry the images fall naturally into classes, we may practically say that he has as many different social selves as there are distinct groups of persons about whose opinion he cares. He generally shows a different side of himself to each of these different groups. Many a youth who is demure enough before his parents and teachers swears and swaggers like a pirate among his tough young friends. End quote. As the 20th century unfolded, many thinkers would explore and refine the idea of a socially fashioned self. George Herbert Mead, Cooley's sometimes colleague, argued in his 1913 book, The Social Self, that children gain a sense of individuality only when they start to play roles, shaping their own words and behavior to the words and behavior of others. To the subjective I is added the objective me. The idea's fullest expression arrived later in the century via the sociologist Irving Goffman's celebrated 1959 book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Whereas Cooley and Mead had focused on how we interpret others' perceptions of us, Goffman concentrated on the other side of the feedback loop, how we adjust our behavior to influence those perceptions. He framed his argument with a famously elaborate analogy to the theater. We go through our days like character actors, taking on different roles depending on which stage we happen to be on. We play one part when we're at home with family, another when we're with colleagues at work, another when we're at school, another when we're out with friends. We modulate our tone of voice, our words, our actions, and our appearance to suit whatever social context we're in. And when we move into another context, we readjust our aspect and affect for the new audience. We're all matters of the arts of impression management. Goffman assumed, as pretty much everyone else did at the time, that social contexts were defined by in-person interactions in actual places: schools, offices, factories, homes, bars, churches, shops. One's social life was situated in the material world, its pace and texture linked to the presence of one's own body and the bodies of others. Because events were bounded in space and time, you couldn't be in two places at once. A person had to travel from one social setting or stage to another. Performances of the self were sequential. One ended before the next began, with little or no overlap. And there were gaps between the performances when a person was, to extend Goffman's metaphor, off stage, alone in a room or a car, or taking a walk, or eating a sandwich on a bench in a park. Such intervals of solitude provided respites from social pressures, opportunities to relax and attend to one's own inner voice. They gave people the sense of privacy that Erwin Altman saw as so essential to a healthy, cohesive psyche. The separation of social situations in time and space acted as, quote, a psychosocial shock absorber, explained the communications professor Joshua Meyrowitz in his 1985 book, No Sense of Place, a work that built on Goffman's ideas. By allowing us to be selective in exposing ourselves to events and other people, it gave us the power to control the flow of our actions and emotions. We weren't called upon to respond to many different situations with many different sets of people all at once. The well-defined boundaries between social events exerted a deep, if often unrecognized, influence on the quality of our emotional and moral lives, he argued. Compassion, empathy, and even ethics may be much more situationally bound than we often care to think, he wrote. Our sense of ourselves and others might be drawn from mental images, but those images were situated in a concrete reality. Being together with others in a place, face to face, gave a richness to our sympathetic and emotional attachments. Goffman, with his single-minded focus on traditional in-person interactions, paid scant attention to mediated communications, to conversations conducted through letters or telegrams or telephone calls. He dismissed them as marginal and derived forms of social contact that supplemented but didn't alter the fundamentally physical nature of personal relations. Meyrowitz, writing a quarter century later after the introduction of the home computer and the modem, took a different view. Seeing the growing importance of online and other mediated communications to people's lives, he realized that Goffman's old orderly state of social affairs was doomed. Radio, television, and the telephone had already weakened the connection between social events and physical spaces. Happenings from all around the world and even outer space were routinely beamed into people's living rooms. The spread of digital media promised to sever the link altogether. Electronic media destroy the specialness of place and time, he wrote. What is happening almost anywhere can be happening wherever we are. Society, he sensed, was entering a time of profound dislocation, when social reality would be defined not by physical interactions in discrete places, but by crisscrossing patterns of information flow. Messages and other social stimuli would flow constantly and indiscriminately. The psychosocial shock absorber would be gone. A universal solvent. That's where we find ourselves today. Before the coming of the news feed, online social networks reflected, at least by analogy, traditional patterns of socializing. Their design maintained divisions of space and time. Each member of a network had his or her own place in the form of a profile page, and people traveled through hyperlinks from place to, quote, visit friends. Status updates and other postings were arranged chronologically. They unspooled sequentially through time, as thoughts and experiences had always unfolded. The feed replaced the old structure of the social world with the logic of the computer. It erased the divisions and disrupted the sequences, removing social interactions from the constraints of space and time and placing them into a frictionless setting of instantaneity and simultaneity. Socializing in this new sphere follows no familiar human pattern. It vibrates chaotically to the otherworldly rhythms of algorithmic calculation. The social and the real have parted ways. No longer tied to particular locations or times of day, social situations and social groups now exist everywhere all at once. We move between them with a tap on a screen, a flick of a finger, a word to a chatbot. And because our phones allow us to socialize all the time, even when alone, interludes of solitude have largely disappeared from everyday life. There's no offstage anymore, no place insulated from communication and its demands. Everyone is always within earshot and eyeshot. The old social architecture, with its walls and doors, its mornings and afternoons and evenings, has collapsed, just as the old epistemic architecture did. Digitization acts as a universal solvent for all that's tangible in culture. The disembodiment of social relations has seemed liberating to many, particularly those who feel isolated or trapped in the rooms available to them in the material world. In its expansiveness, the virtual can be accommodating in ways the real cannot. And for pretty much everyone, online society is at times exhilarating. So many people to talk to gaze upon, to be watched by, a never-ending passeggiata with what seems to be the entirety of humanity circulating through the clamorous ether. But it's also exhausting and oppressive. Social media is a neurosis machine. Like a bad parent or cruel lover, it simultaneously indulges and punishes us. Even as it encourages the id to run free, it cracks the superego's whip. We know we're always being watched and judged, and we know the shamers lie in wait, knives sharpened, beset on both sides, and cut off from solitude's refuge, the ego wilts. For creatures such as ourselves, fashioned by evolution to live closely together as physical beings in physical places among physical things, disembodiment also brings a perpetual sense of disorientation and dysphoria. When we carry our acute sensitivity to social signals into a world where such signals are no longer regulated by time and space, no longer tied to bodies and places, no longer subject to attenuation by personal discretion, the performance of self metastasizes into a wreck, as the New Yorker essayist Gia Tolentino writes in her book Trick Mirror. Or as Meyerowitz put it years ago, when we are everywhere, we are also no place. Even in social media's earliest days, the blurring of social context provoked surprise and uneasiness. When around 2003 people started joining Friendster and linking with their friends, they at first assumed that the boundaries that define social relations in the physical world were still in place. They didn't realize that as friends linked to friends, and those friends linked to other friends, a person's social network would expand recklessly in every direction. Posts and pictures would be visible to many friends on the platform who were strangers in real life. As the social scientist Dana Boyd explained in an early ethnographic study of Friendster, the pioneering social networkers thought they were replicating local social contexts and communities in a virtual space, even as the platform was dissolving the barriers that had kept those contexts and communities intact and distinct. One high school teacher Boyd interviewed related the shock she felt when some of her students came up to her in class one day and asked why she liked to do drugs. It turned out they had joined Friendster, discovered her profile, and read some conversations she had had with friends about attending a Burning Man festival. As people came to realize that the versions of themselves they presented to different sets of acquaintances could no longer be kept separate, the audience was a jumble now. They grappled with a new sort of identity crisis. How do you speak to everyone at once? How do you shape a self fit for mass consumption? The cultural anthropologist Michael Wesch described the experience in suitably melodramatic terms in an influential paper about YouTube's original vloggers. The images, actions, and words captured by the webcam's lens at any moment can be transported to anywhere on the planet and preserved, the performer must assume, for all time. The little glass lens becomes the gateway to a black hole sucking all of time and space, virtually all possible context, in on itself. The resulting crisis of self-presentation, as Wesch termed it, became widespread the moment Facebook opened its platform to all. In an instant, thousands of college students who had been posting messages and photos they assumed would be seen only by other students found their online lives exposed to everyone. The walls of the dorm and the frat house turned transparent. Parents and grandparents, teachers, future employers, prospective lovers, all could see the bong-sucking party pics, the goofy selfies, the intemperate remarks. In a 2010 interview with a technology reporter, Zuckerberg summed up the new reality bluntly. You have one identity, he said, repeating the sentence 3 times for emphasis. The days of you having a different image for your work friends or co-workers and for the other people you know are probably coming to an end pretty quickly. End quote. He put his own self-serving spin on the phenomenon, promoting it as a force for moral cleanliness. Having 2 identities for yourself is an example of a lack of integrity. End quote. Facebook, by forcing each of us into an identity straitjacket, would purify society, and it would further its own interest in the process. A uniform self is easy to package as a bundle of data and sell to advertisers. As Zuckerberg was declaring the end of social context and the extermination of the protean self, the public rebelled. Eager to keep some separation between social spheres, people began looking for ways to reestablish boundaries within the new media environment. The young, again, led the way. During the 2010s, high school and college students shifted their social media use away from the public platform of Facebook, where the olds lurked, and onto the more intimate platform of Snapchat, where they could restrict their audience and where messages disappeared quickly. Private accounts became popular on other social networks as well. Group chats, group texts, and direct messages proliferated. On Instagram, people established secret pseudonymous accounts, fake Instagrams, or Finstas, linked to their closest friends. Platforms tailored to specific social groups, Slack for work colleagues, Sermo for physicians, Brainly for students, Nextdoor for neighbors, came into wide use. Responding to the trend, Facebook itself introduced tools allowing members to restrict who could see a post and to specify how long it remained visible. People, it turned out, didn't want all the world to be their stage, at least not all the time. They wanted to go on performing different parts on different stages for different audiences. We realized, most of us anyway, that we're happier as character actors than as stars. It's my sweetie there. The mirror ball self. While the proliferation of specialized platforms allows people more control over who can see their messages, it only aggravates the crisis of self-presentation. The platform's walls may feel reassuring, but they're mirages, illusions conjured up by software programmers in response to consumer demands. They remain permeable to the flows of data that social media companies collect in their processing centers and use to manipulate content and people. And by providing a sense of personal agency and security, they encourage people to shift even more of their lives online, parceling out messages, images, and other communications among a growing variety of apps, networks, and sites. These days, the typical internet user juggles 8 or 9 social media accounts, double the number of a decade ago. Maintaining one's virtual presence has become for many a full-time occupation, or at least preoccupation. The looking glass self has turned into the mirror ball self, a whirl of fragmented reflections from a myriad of overlapping sources. We see bits of ourselves in the responses or non-responses to our posts. We see bits of ourselves in all of the messages we receive and send. And because we know the feed algorithms are tailoring all the content we see to their assessment of who we are, we see bits of ourselves in everything else as well. We piece together a self-image as best we can out of shattered edges, as Taylor Swift sang on her aptly titled 2020 lockdown hit, Mirror Ball. In our new milieu, having a central presence in experience hardly matters, the sociologists James Holstein and Jaber Gubrium write. The self flits before us in myriad versions unanchored to concrete experiences. The 13-year-old with a half dozen IM windows open on the family PC in 1999 is now the young adult managing dozens of intertwining information feeds and conversation threads on a phone. Some involve family, some involve work colleagues, some involve friends, some involve the amorphous mass known as the general public. Each entails choices about how to present oneself and interpret the selves of others through words, images, and symbols. The audience may be segmented, as a marketer would say, but all the segments exist at once, always watching and judging, or worst of all, ignoring. The self collapses into and must compete with everything else in the feed, from news stories to celebrity memes. Media programming used to be something we looked at and listened to, something presented to our senses from the outside. Now it takes shape within us, its production exerting a formative pressure on our being. Media today works from the inside, the French philosopher and I don't know this word. The French philosopher and semiotician Jean Baudrillard argued in The Perfect Crime, precisely as a virus does with a normal cell. Let me read that again. Media today works from the inside, the French philosopher and semiotician Jean Baudrillard argued in The Perfect Crime, precisely as a virus does with a normal cell. We consume media, then media consumes us. We're not just actors playing roles anymore. We've been required to take on the jobs of producer and impresario, honker and MC, for a show that never stops. Even when we're not posting, we're scouting locations and looking for material. The transfer of the self-setting from bodies to communication systems is not something that's happened all of a sudden. It has been going on a long time, even if we haven't always been aware of it. As we've adapted our ways of life to the demands of the modern bureaucratic state, to a web-like society woven out of strands of highly processed information, we've gotten used to expressing ourselves through and seeing ourselves reflected in documents and photographs, audio recordings and films, ledgers and registers. As the feminist sociologist Dorothy Smith wrote in 1990, quote, "We get passports, birth certificates, parking tickets. We fill in forms to apply for jobs, for insurance, for dental benefits. We're given grades, diplomas, degrees. We pay bills and taxes. We read and answer advertisements. We order from menus in restaurants, take a doctor's prescription to the drugstore, write letters to newspapers. We watch television, go to the movies, and so on and so on. Our lives are, to a more extensive degree than we care to think, infused with a process of inscription." End quote. But until the ascendancy of social media and the smartphone, inscriptions of the self tended to take material or at least analog form. They were attached to particular places and times and had limited, usually administrative purposes. We could keep them at a distance, viewing them as another set of props on the various stages we trod. Even if their abstract renderings of the self encroached bit by bit on the body's material sovereignty, they didn't displace the body as the site of the self. It was only with social media that we became able to separate being from body, to inscribe ourselves moment by moment on the screen, to reimagine ourselves as streams of text and image. The effect is a strange, needy sort of solipsism. We socialize more than ever, but we're also at a further remove from those we interact with. The sympathetic imagination that Cooley and Goffman took for granted, the ability to get inside the heads of others, to sense their perceptions and feelings through direct observation, weakens and warps when the others are hidden behind screens, their thoughts and emotions filtered through algorithms. Rather than relying on empathy and intuition to navigate social relations, we're forced to decipher others' attitudes by tracking and evaluating explicit, often quantitative measures, follower counts, numbers of likes and shares, the time that elapses before responses arrive, the types of emoji that appear in a comment, the number of exclamation marks that punctuate a reply. Even the presence or absence of a period at the end of a text message becomes laden with meaning, another clue to how we're perceived. The more mediated our lives become, the more we come to see ourselves and others as abstractions. When in the real world, as we used to call it, the self feels its way into the corners of the various places and moments through which the body moves. That doesn't look like a complete sentence to me. Let me reread that. It's not a complete sentence. When in the real world, as we used to call it, the self feels its way into the corners of the various places and moments through which the body moves. I think there probably should have been a comma there, leading into the next. I think the next is the rest of that sentence. I'm going to reread it. This time I'm going to insert my own comma as I read it, and with the ensuing sentence as part of that sentence. So let's do it again. When in the real world, as we used to call it, the self feels its way into the corners of the various places and moments through which the body moves, the body is our means of being a separate and distinct individual, but it is equally our means of exploring and accommodating ourselves to society in all its contingency and complexity. To shape ourselves to others with whom we share actual time and actual space is not to become broken or fake, or, as Zuckerberg suggested, to lose integrity. It's to undergo an enlargement of the sympathetic imagination and in the process become at once more fully an individual and more fully a part of what Cooley termed the social mind. It is in and through the body that the individual self and the social self emerge and meld. Every person is special, Cooley stressed, but no person is separate. When the self collapses into content, it shrinks. Tell you what, this has gone on 40 minutes. I'm going to stop right here. We've got about, let's see. We've got about 11 more pages, actually 10 and a half more pages. And we are at this point already we're already 14 pages through, so a little over halfway through the chapter. I'm going to stop right here at 41 minutes, and we'll take up next time in the middle of Chapter 7, The Dislocated Eye, of Nicholas Carr's Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. Thank you for watching.